The world ended in a shriek of tortured metal and a blinding flash of silver rain. One moment, Ilara Vance was humming along to a forgotten pop song, her beat-up Civic eating up the last miles of I-95. The next, the road ahead erupted. A colossal semi-truck, a phantom in the torrential downpour, jackknifed across all three lanes, sending a tidal wave of spray and debris into the already abysmal visibility. There was no time to react, only the instinctual slam of her foot on the brake pedal, a futile prayer, and the sickening lurch as her small car was shunted sideways, tires losing all purchase, spiraling into the chaos. The crash wasn't a single impact. It was a symphony of destruction. A cacophony of screeching tires, the groan of crumpling steel, the explosive pop of airbags, and then, mercifully, a jarring thud that snapped her forward against the restraints before she slammed back into the seat. Disoriented, the scent of burning oil and damp asphalt filling her nostrils, Ilara coughed, pushing against the deflated airbag that smelled vaguely of burnt toast. Her head throbbed, a dull ache behind her eyes, but she was alive. Every limb responded. A quick self-assessment, a check for obvious bleeds, nothing. Just the adrenaline-fueled tremor shaking her hands. Outside, the rain still hammered down, but the symphony had died, replaced by a new, more terrifying chorus. The whimpers and cries of the wounded, the shocked silence of those too stunned to speak. Steam billowed from twisted engines, mingling with the mist, giving the scene an apocalyptic, dreamlike quality. Ilara fumbled for her phone, but the screen was shattered, the device useless. Her nursing student instincts, honed over countless hours in clinicals, surged to the forefront, overriding the residual shock. People needed help. She was a nursing student, halfway through her accelerated BSN. This wasn't a simulation. Pushing open her door, which protested with a groan of twisted metal, Ilara stepped out into the deluge. The scene was even worse than she'd imagined. Cars were piled atop each other like discarded toys. A minivan was overturned, its wheels still spinning slowly in the air. Further down, smoke curled lazily from the engine compartment of a sedan. Ilara's eyes scanned, prioritizing. She remembered her first aid training, the ABCs. Airway, breathing, circulation. Who was conscious? Who was bleeding? Whose scream sounded most urgent? She moved with purpose, a small, determined figure in a soaked rain jacket, her dark hair plastered to her face. Her first stop was the overturned minivan. A frantic young woman was trying to pull at the passenger door, sobbing. My baby's in there!" Ilara quickly assessed the situation. The door was jammed. "Stay calm," she instructed, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Is anyone else hurt?" The woman shook her head, pointing to a toddler's car seat. Ilara, leveraging her small frame, found a gap, peering into the overturned vehicle. The child was whimpering, but conscious. "He's breathing," she announced, relief flooding the mother's face. "He's scared, but he looks okay. We need to wait for the professionals. Don't move him." She gently redirected the mother to a safer spot away from the wreckage, promising to stay nearby. Next, she found an elderly man slumped over his steering wheel, a deep laceration on his forehead. He was conscious but confused. "Sir, can you hear me?" Ilara checked his pulse, strong and regular. The bleeding was superficial but alarming. She tore a strip from her own rain jacket, pressing it firmly against the wound, offering reassurance. "Just hold this here, help is coming." She moved on, her clinical eye darting from victim to victim, offering calm words, assessing injuries. She wasn't a paramedic, but she was trained enough to know how to stabilize, how to comfort, how to not make things worse. The cacophony of sirens grew louder, piercing through the rain. Flashing lights painted the scene in an eerie strobe effect. Fire trucks, ambulances, and police cruisers began to converge, their arrival a tangible shift from chaos to organized response. Ilara felt a wave of relief, but her work wasn't done. She spotted a cluster of paramedics struggling near a badly mangled sedan, its entire front end crushed. They were working frantically around a stretcher, their voices urgent. "He's crashing! Another unit for O-negative stat!" A harried paramedic yelled into his radio, frustration evident in his tone. "We're running out! We need more blood now!" Ilara paused, her heart leaping into her throat. O-negative. That was her blood type. Rare. The universal donor. She hesitated for only a second. Her head was still pounding, her muscles aching, but the image of the young man on the stretcher, pale and still, spurred her forward. She walked towards the group, her voice slightly breathless from exertion. "I'm O negative," she announced, startling the paramedics. "I'm a nursing student. I can donate." The paramedic, a grizzled man with sweat and rain plastering his hair to his forehead, looked her up and down, skepticism warring with desperation. "You're sure?" "Positive," Alara affirmed, though her legs felt like jelly. "I've donated before. My card's at home, but I know it." "Get her in the M unit," the paramedic barked, pointing to a smaller, mobile response vehicle set up as a temporary triage station. "Move, he doesn't have much time." Ilara clambered into the M unit, a small, sterile space, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and fear. A female medic quickly prepped her arm. "You're a lifesaver, kid. Who is he?" "Infantryman," the medic replied curtly, attaching the needle. "Home on leave, hit hard, lost a lot of blood. If you hadn't shown up." She trailed off, implying the grim alternative. Alara focused on the rhythmic squeezing of her fist, watching her blood flow into the collection bag. She felt a strange mixture of lightheadedness and profound satisfaction. Here, in the heart of this terrible accident, she was doing something tangible, something vital. Her blood, her very essence, was flowing into another human being, giving him a chance. She didn't know the soldier, didn't know his story, but in that moment, he was simply another human being in desperate need, and she could help. When the bag was full, the medic quickly detached the needle, applying pressure to Alara's arm. "You did good. Rest for a bit. We'll get you some water." Alara nodded, feeling a sudden wave of fatigue wash over her. The adrenaline was receding, leaving her drained. She watched as two paramedics, their faces grim but hopeful, rushed the blood bag out of the M unit and back towards the mangled sedan. She stayed for another hour, answering questions for police, making sure the elderly man she'd helped was safely with paramedics. She didn't seek thanks, didn't linger. As the rain finally began to ease, leaving behind a glistening, shattered landscape, Alara felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had faced chaos, had offered what she could, and had, hopefully, made a difference. Her car was a wreck, her head still throbbed, but her spirit felt strangely light. She hailed a rideshare, giving her address, looking forward to a long, hot shower and the oblivion of sleep. It was just one small act of kindness, the kind of thing anyone should do, given the chance. She couldn't have known that this simple, selfless deed had just pulled her into a world far more dangerous and complex than a highway pileup. The next morning, the world returned in muted shades of gray. Alara woke to the gentle patter of rain against her window pane and a deep, full-body ache that served as a nagging reminder of the previous day's violence. Every muscle protested as she swung her legs out of bed. Her head still felt like a bruised peach, tender to the touch. She shuffled into her small kitchen, the comforting ritual of making coffee a small anchor in the lingering disorientation. The apartment, with its precariously stacked nursing textbooks and half-dead succulent on the windowsill, felt like a sanctuary, a quiet harbor after a brutal storm. While the coffee maker gurgled to life, she turned on the small television in her living room. The local news was, predictably, leading with the I-95 pileup. Grainy helicopter footage showed the snake of twisted metal she had walked through. The reporter spoke in somber tones about the dozen injured, the miraculous lack of fatalities. Then, a photo flashed on the screen, a young man in a crisp army uniform, his smile wide and genuine. Among the most critically injured was Private Ben Carter, an infantryman returning home on leave, the reporter's voice narrated. Sources at Northwood General Hospital report that after receiving emergency treatment on the scene, his condition has been stabilized and has since been upgraded to serious but stable. A hospital spokesperson called his rapid improvement nothing short of remarkable. A genuine smile touched Alara's lips for the first time that day. He made it. The exhaustion, the aches, the trauma, they all seemed to recede just a little. It had been worth it. That small, anonymous act had mattered. She took a sip of her coffee, the bitter warmth a welcome comfort, and began the tedious process of calling her insurance company. The conversation was a predictable maze of hold music and scripted apologies. As she was jotting down a claim number, it happened. It wasn't a friendly knock, not the rap of a delivery person or a neighbor. It was a sharp, percussive sound that struck the door with an unnerving solidity. 3 distinct authoritative raps that vibrated through the cheap wood. Thump, thump, thump. Alara frowned, setting down her pen. "Just a minute," she called out, expecting to find a police officer with follow-up questions about the accident. She padded to the door and peered through the peephole. The distorted fisheye lens showed her a scene so out of place, so utterly bizarre, that for a moment she thought she was still dreaming. Standing directly in front of her door was a man who looked like he had stepped off a recruitment poster and into the grim reality of her apartment hallway. He was in his late 50s, with a ramrod-straight posture, a jawline that could cut glass, and hair the color of iron filings, clipped to severe perfection. But it was the uniform that stole her breath. It was a flawless army service uniform, adorned with a constellation of ribbons on the chest, and, on each shoulder, the unmistakable silver stars of a general. Flanking him, standing at parade rest, were two imposing military police officers, their faces impassive, their presence a silent, overwhelming threat. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. This wasn't about the accident. This was something else entirely. Swallowing hard, she undid the deadbolt and opened the door a few inches, the security chain still in place. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice betraying a slight tremble. The general's eyes, a pale, piercing blue, met hers. They held no warmth, only a clinical, assessing quality. He didn't smile. "You are Ilara Vance?" he asked. His voice was calm, a low baritone that carried an implicit, unshakable authority. "Yes." "Who are you?" "I am General Marcus Thorne," he said, as if stating a fundamental law of the universe. "May we come in? We have some matters to discuss with you." It was phrased as a question, but the tone was that of a command. I don't understand. What is this about?" General Thorne's gaze was unwavering. "This is about your actions at the I-95 incident yesterday. Specifically, your interaction with a United States Army service member." Ilara's confusion deepened. "You mean Private Carter? Is he okay?" The news said he was stable. A flicker of something annoyance, perhaps, at her digression crossed Thorne's face before vanishing. "Private Carter's condition is a military matter. My concern is with the unregulated medical assistance you rendered. You donated blood, correct?" "Yes, they needed O negative. I'm a nursing student. I knew I could help." She said it with a hint of pride, the last vestige of the satisfaction she'd felt that morning. Thorne's lips thinned into what might have been a smile on a different man. On him, it was a predator's grimace. "Your civic-mindedness is noted," he said, the words dripping with condescension. "However, there were irregularities in the chain of custody of that biological material. We require a follow-up medical debriefing. You'll need to come with us." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Come with you? Now?" "I can't just leave. I have classes, I have work. I can go to a clinic, give you a statement." "That will not be necessary," Thorne cut her off smoothly. "We have a dedicated facility that is best equipped to handle this situation. It is not a request, Miss Vance." The politeness was gone, replaced by a steel thread of command. The two MPs shifted their weight, a subtle, synchronized movement that was more intimidating than any overt threat. Ilara's defiance, born of sheer disbelief, began to surface. "With all due respect, General, you can't just order a civilian to go with you. Do you have a warrant? Am I under arrest for something?" For the first time, General Thorne looked almost amused. He took a half-step closer to the door, his presence seeming to suck the air from the hallway. "A warrant?" he repeated softly, as if she'd spoken a foreign language. "Miss Vance, you have involved yourself in a matter of military readiness. The biological sample you provided has become a component of a national security interest. Civilian legal conventions in a situation like this are flexible. You are not under arrest. You are being officially requested to cooperate for the security of the nation. I assure you, it is in your best interest to accept the request." The veiled threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He was telling her, in the calmest, most terrifying way possible, that her rights were irrelevant. Her small apartment, her sanctuary, no longer felt safe. It felt like a trap he had sprung. The two MPs behind him were not there for his protection. They were there for her. She looked from Thorne's unyielding face to the blank expressions of the soldiers, and she knew. She could scream, she could fight, she could slam the door, but it would only delay the inevitable and make it worse. They were not here to ask. They were here to take. The kindness she had offered, the simple act of giving blood to save a life, had somehow been twisted into a summons, a claim of ownership. Her shoulders slumped in defeat, a cold, hard knot of anger forming in her stomach. "I need to get my purse," she said, her voice flat and hollow. General Thorne nodded, a curt, satisfied gesture. "See that you do. We don't have all day." He stepped back, his posture relaxing infinitesimally, the posture of a man who had never for a moment doubted the outcome. As Alara turned from the door, the security chain rattling in her trembling hands, she felt the invisible walls of her own life closing in around her. The hero of yesterday had just become a prisoner today. The ride was a study in sensory deprivation. Alara was escorted into the back of a black government SUV with heavily tinted windows, effectively rendering her blind to the outside world. The MPs sat on either side of her, silent and imposing, their presence a constant, suffocating pressure. No one spoke. The smooth, powerful hum of the engine was the only sound, a monotonous drone that stretched minutes into an eternity. She tried to track their movements, a turn here, a highway on-ramp there, but it was useless. After 20 minutes, she had no idea if she was in the city, the suburbs, or the middle of nowhere. She was simply cargo being delivered. The vehicle eventually slowed, passing through what sounded like a series of heavy gates before pulling to a stop inside a cavernous, echoing structure that smelled of concrete and disinfectant. A door slid open, flooding the interior with a flat, artificial light. "Out!" one of the MPs grunted. Alara stepped onto the polished concrete floor of an underground parking garage. There were no other cars, only a single elevator door set into a pristine white wall. General Thorne was waiting for them, his expression as impassive as ever. He led the way into the elevator, which ascended without a single jolt, the silence absolute. When the doors opened again, they were in a place that defied easy categorization. It wasn't a prison, it wasn't a hospital. It was a seamless blend of both, designed with a terrifying, minimalist precision. The floors were a gleaming, off-white composite material. The walls were a soft, calming gray, devoid of any art or decoration. The light emanated from recessed strips in the ceiling, casting no shadows. The air was cool, dry, and carried the faint, sterile scent of a laboratory. It was a place designed for function, not comfort, a human terrarium. A woman in pale blue scrubs approached them, a tablet in her hand. She had a kind face, but her eyes were professionally distant. "Miss Vance, I'm Nurse Diaz. I'll be handling your intake, if you'll follow me." General Thorne gave a curt nod. "I have matters to attend to. See that Miss Vance is made comfortable. Full spectrum medical workup. Begin immediately." With that, he turned and strode down a corridor, his footsteps making no sound on the strange floor. Comfortable was a cruel joke. In a small, bright room, Nurse Diaz conducted the intake with a polite but unbreakable firmness. Alara was instructed to hand over her purse, her jacket, her watch. When she hesitated at her phone, the nurse's kind expression tightened. "It's standard procedure, dear. No personal electronics are permitted in the facility. It's for signal security." "Where am I?" Alara demanded, her voice rising. "I have a right to know where you're holding me." "You're in a secure federal medical observation facility," the nurse replied, the words a meaningless, bureaucratic shield. She placed Alara's phone and wallet into a lockbox. "These will be kept safe for you." The click of the lock sounded like a gavel falling. Her last link to the outside world was severed. She was given a set of plain gray sweatpants and a long-sleeved t-shirt, the fabric soft but institutional. Then, she was escorted to her room. It was more like a high-end dorm room than a cell, a comfortable bed, a small desk, an attached bathroom with a shower. But the window was made of thick, reinforced glass and looked out onto a manicured but empty courtyard surrounded by a high, unscalable wall. And when Nurse Diaz left, Alara heard the soft, electronic snick of the lock engaging from the outside. She was a specimen in a jar, and they had just screwed on the lid. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous, disorienting routine. There was no clock in her room, no way to gauge the passage of time beyond the 3 meals that arrived on a tray through a small slot in the door. Twice a day, an orderly would escort her from her room down a long corridor to the medical wing. This was the heart of her violation. The wing was a state-of-the-art laboratory, filled with gleaming chrome machines that hummed and beeped. Here, she was no longer Alara Vance, nursing student. She was a biological sample. Every day, they took her blood. Not just a vial, but multiple, until she felt a persistent anemic weariness. They subjected her to a battery of tests that seemed to have no end. She was put into MRI machines that deafened her with their clanging, strapped to treadmills with dozens of electrodes stuck to her chest, her brainwave activity monitored while she was shown flashing patterns of light. The medical team was led by a civilian contractor, a man in his 40s with weary eyes and a perpetually worried expression. His ID badge read Dr. Eris Benedict, Unlike the others, he wouldn't quite meet her gaze. He was meticulously professional, his touch gentle as he drew her blood or checked her vitals. But there was a tension in his jaw, a flicker of something deeply uncomfortable in his eyes. Alara tried to fight back with the only weapon she had, her knowledge. "What is this test for?" she'd ask, as they prepped her for another scan. "Are you screening for specific genetic markers? Which ones?" Dr. Benedict would offer a clinical evasion. "We're establishing a comprehensive baseline of your unique physiology, Miss Vance." "Unique how?" she'd press. "My blood type is rare, but it's not unheard of." "What are you looking for?" "That information is classified," he'd murmur, turning his attention to a monitor. One afternoon they tried to perform a bone marrow aspiration. She refused. She sat on the edge of the examination table, her arms crossed, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and defiance. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "It's an invasive procedure. I don't consent." The nurse looked to Dr. Benedict, who sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. He dismissed the nurse and turned to Alara, his expression pained. "Miss Vance, Ilara, cooperation will make this entire process smoother for everyone. The General has authorized these tests. I don't care what the General authorized. This is my body. You are a doctor. You took an oath. You can't perform a procedure on a patient who has not given informed consent." Dr. Benedict was silent for a long moment. "You are not classified as a patient," he said softly, the words hanging in the air between them. "You are classified as an asset. I am following orders. If you refuse, I will have to report your noncompliance, and I promise you, the General's methods of persuasion are far less pleasant than mine." It was a threat, but it was delivered with the weary resignation of a man who hated the words coming out of his own mouth. In his warning, she saw the first crack in the sterile facade of the facility. He was a jailer who was starting to pity the prisoner. Her small victory was short-lived. The next day, she wasn't taken to the medical wing. Instead, she was escorted to a conference room. It was as sterile as the rest of the facility, dominated by a large, polished table. Waiting for her was a man in a JAG Corps uniform, a captain's bars gleaming on his shoulders. He was young, with a sharp suit and an even sharper smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Vance, I'm Captain Evans," he said, gesturing to a chair. "I'm here to clarify your legal standing and formalize your cooperative agreement with the Department of Defense." He slid a sheaf of documents across the table, at least 50 pages thick. The top page read, "Project Nightingale, Special Asset Cooperative Mandate." What is this?" Ilara asked, her stomach twisting. "This," Captain Evans said with practiced smoothness, "is your future. It's a standard non-disclosure and services agreement. It outlines your role as a paid consultant for the duration of the project. A very generously paid consultant, I might add. It details your compensation, housing, and other benefits. All you need to do is sign." Alara stared at the dense blocks of text, a dizzying sea of legalese. She saw phrases like, "in perpetuity," "all biological materials derived therefrom," "waiver of civil recourse," and "subject to protocols determined by the project director." "This says I have to submit to any medical procedures they want," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It says I can't talk about this to anyone, ever. It says this agreement is forever." "As I said, a standard agreement for an asset of your importance," Evans replied, unbothered. "And if I don't sign it?" Captain Evans's smile finally faded. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential, chilling tone. "If you don't sign, Miss Vance, then you are no longer a potential consultant. You become a security risk, a person who is privy to classified national security information and is actively refusing to cooperate. In that scenario, you would be designated an enemy combatant under Section 1021 of the NDAA. We would be legally authorized to hold you in military detention, indefinitely, without trial. Your nursing license would be flagged, your records sealed. For all intents and purposes, Alara Vance would cease to exist. So you see, you can be a well-compensated patriot, or you can be a ghost. The choice is yours." It was a checkmate, a soul-crushing bureaucratic trap from which there was no escape. They had used the law itself to make her an outlaw, her freedom a commodity to be signed away. She stared at the signature line, feeling the last of her fight draining out of her. Later that evening, General Thorne entered her room. He didn't knock. He found her sitting on her bed, staring at the reinforced window. He pulled the desk chair over and sat opposite her, his posture relaxed, as if he were a patient father dealing with a difficult child. Captain Evans tells me you're having trouble with the paperwork, he began, his voice surprisingly gentle. I understand this is a lot to process. I thought perhaps some context might help. He proceeded to tell her a story. It was the story of two brilliant, patriotic scientists, Doctors Arlen and Lena Vance. Her parents. He spoke of their genius, their dedication to their country. He told her about their life's work, Project Nightingale, an audacious attempt to isolate and synthesize the human regenerative process, to create a serum that could make battlefield injuries, even mortal ones, a thing of the past. They were on the verge of a breakthrough, Thorne said, his eyes gleaming with a fervent light. But the funding was cut. The oversight committee got squeamish. They shut it down, called it a failure. Your parents were devastated. They believed their work could save millions of lives. Alara listened, a cold dread creeping up her spine. She barely remembered her parents. They had died in a car accident when she was 5. She had been told it was a lab accident. Another lie. They didn't stop, Thorne continued, leaning closer. They believed in their work so fiercely that they took the ultimate step. They refined the prototype, stabilized it, and made sure their legacy would survive. They made it a part of you, Alara. It took a moment for the words to land. When they did, they hit with the force of a physical blow. Her unique blood, the thing that had brought her here, wasn't a random quirk of nature. It was a product, an experiment. Private Carter's impossible recovery was the proof, Thorne said, his voice ringing with triumph. Your blood, the formula your parents perfected, it not only saved him, it regenerated his damaged tissues at a rate we've never seen. It's the key to a future where no soldier has to die from their wounds. He stood up, his shadow falling over her. You see, you are not a prisoner here. You are the culmination of your parents' life work. You are their gift to this nation. You are a living miracle, a strategic asset of incalculable value. He walked to the door and paused, turning back to deliver the final, crushing sentence. Your blood, your very genetic code, belongs to the United States Army. In a way, Alara, so do you. The door closed with a soft snick, the lock engaging. Alara didn't cry. The fear and confusion had burned away, leaving behind something new. Something hard and cold and dangerous. It was rage. A pure, crystalline rage against the man who had stolen her life, against the system that allowed it, and against the parents who had decided her destiny before she was even born. They had made her into an object, a thing, a weapon. And in that sterile, silent room, Alara Vance made a new choice. She would not be their asset. She would be their enemy. The rage that General Thorne had so carefully cultivated in Alara did not explode. It did not manifest in screams or tears or futile violence against the reinforced walls of her room. Instead, it cooled. It compressed. It crystallized into something cold, sharp, and utterly clear. A plan. She now understood the battlefield. It wasn't the sterile medical wing or the polished conference room. It was a war of information and psychology. Thorne had shown his entire strategy, laid bare his belief that she was an object to be controlled. And he had made a critical mistake. He assumed that because he could cage her body, he also owned her mind. The next morning, the staff of the facility witnessed a remarkable transformation. The sullen, resistant specimen was gone. In her place was a model of cooperation. When the orderly came to collect her for her morning blood draw, Alara greeted him with a polite nod. In the medical wing, she no longer argued. She extended her arm for the needle without complaint. She slid into the MRI machine without protest. Her compliance was so absolute that it was unsettling. But beneath the placid surface, a furious accounting was taking place. Her mind, sharp and analytical from years of studying complex biological systems, went to work. She was no longer just a patient. She was a researcher, and this facility was her field of study. Her own body was the primary subject. She began to catalog everything. The exact amount of blood they took each day, the specific frequency of the MRI scans, the questions the neurologists asked during her cognitive tests. She was building a data set, searching for a pattern, a purpose she could exploit. Her questions to the medical staff changed. They were no longer defiant challenges, but inquiries veiled in the guise of a curious, intelligent student. "That's a Siemens magnetom, isn't it? 3 Tesla?" she asked a technician one day. "The resolution for mapping neural pathways must be incredible. Are you tracking synaptic plasticity or focusing on glial cell activation?" The technician, surprised, mumbled something about classified protocols, but Alara had already gotten what she needed. They weren't just monitoring her. They were studying her brain's response to the agent in her blood. She observed the facility's human rhythms with the same intensity. The orderly who escorted her, Mark, always had a faint tremor in his left hand and chewed on his thumbnail. He was nervous, likely new. The guard at the end of her hall, a stocky man named Peterson, was lazy. He'd shift his weight from foot to foot, his gaze lingering on the ceiling cameras, bored. He did a full sweep of the corridor every 30 minutes, but for a period of about 90 seconds around the 20-minute mark, the camera at the far end was obscured by a support pillar from his vantage point. Her most intense focus was on Dr. Eris Benedict. She saw the conflict waging behind his tired eyes. He was a man of science, trapped in a project that defied every ethical principle he was supposed to uphold. She began to subtly test him, dropping comments she knew would resonate with his scientific curiosity and his conscience. The cellular regeneration must be fascinating from a biological standpoint, she commented idly one afternoon as he was checking her blood pressure. But the risk of Hayflick limit bypass must be a concern. Without apoptosis functioning as a proper check, unregulated telomerase activity could be problematic. She saw a flicker in his eyes. She had just named the fundamental mechanism for cancer. She was showing him that she understood the science as well as he did, and that she knew the catastrophic potential of what was flowing through her veins. She was letting him know she wasn't just a victim, she was a peer. The opportunity came a week later. She was the last patient in the medical wing, a late-night EEG that Thorne had ordered. Most of the staff had gone. Doctor. Benedict was removing the electrodes from her scalp, his movements slow and deliberate. The only other person in the room was a junior nurse, who was busy inputting data across the room, her back to them. They were my parents, Alara said, her voice barely a whisper. Thorne told me. Benedict's hands froze for a fraction of a second. I know, he whispered back, his voice thick with a guilt he could no longer contain. I was a post-grad researcher when Project Nightingale was active. I never met them, but I studied their papers. They were brilliant, uncompromising. They believed they could save the world. Is that what Thorne is doing? He resumed his work, his movements now a little shaky. Thorne is a zealot. Your parents wanted to create a cure. Thorne wants to build a weapon. He's ignoring the risks, burying the data that doesn't fit his narrative. This was it. The moment she had been working towards. What data? She pressed, her voice urgent but low. He glanced at the nurse, who was still occupied. He leaned closer, his voice so quiet she could feel his breath against her ear. The project was shut down for a reason. The agent is unstable. In the initial animal trials, it worked miracles for the first 6 months. Rapid healing, tissue regeneration, but then anomalies began. Aggressive, untreatable tumors. Systemic cellular degradation. The agent doesn't just heal, it keeps going. It doesn't know how to stop. The blood in her veins suddenly felt like a slow-acting poison. Private Carter? He's a hero today, Benedict whispered grimly. In a year, he could be a casualty. Thorne knows. He simply sees it as an acceptable loss. The monstrous, cold calculation of it took her breath away. Benedict pulled back, his face pale. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a sudden, desperate resolve. His hand moved to the pocket of his lab coat. What Thorne is doing is a crime against humanity, and he is using your parents' legacy to do it. He's using you to do it. With a movement so swift she almost missed it, he pressed a small, cold object into her palm, closing her fingers around it. Corridor B, 4th floor. It's a janitorial supply hub, seldom used after 2200 hours. The west-facing wall has a ventilation shaft that leads to the surface. It's a risk, a huge one, but it's the only way. She looked down at her clenched fist. She could feel the sharp corners of a key card and a tiny pill-shaped object. A micro SD card. Everything is on there, he breathed. The original project files, the suppressed animal trial data, Thorne's internal memos. Everything you need to destroy him. There's a burner phone in the 3rd locker. I'll trigger a medical alert in the south wing at 0200. It'll draw most of the security staff for at least 10 minutes. That's your window. Don't fail. He stepped back just as the nurse turned around, his expression once again a mask of weary professionalism. All done, Miss Vance. The orderly will escort you back to your room. But Thorne was not a man to be underestimated. Her compliance, her newfound resolve, it hadn't gone unnoticed. He might not have known its source, but he recognized the change. He saw the steel in her spine where before there had been fear. he decided it was time to remind her of the levers of control he still possessed. The next day, she was summoned not to the medical wing, but to his office. It was spacious, impeccably neat, and featured a large monitor on the wall. "Your mother has been concerned," Thorne said without preamble, gesturing for her to sit. "We felt it was best for all involved if you could reassure her." The screen flickered to life, and her mother's face, etched with worry, appeared. "Ellie! Oh, thank God! They wouldn't tell me anything. Are you all right? Where are you?" Alara's heart seized. "I'm fine, Mom. I'm okay. I'm on a special research project. It's a big opportunity. I can't say much, you know how it is. Confidential." The lies felt like acid on her tongue. "But are you safe? Are they treating you well?" "Yes, Mom. Everyone's very professional," she said, forcing a smile. As she spoke, Thorne, who was sitting just out of the camera's view, gave a subtle signal to someone in the room. The camera angle on Ellie's face widened slightly. In the reflection of the polished desk, she could now see one of the hulking MPs standing silently in the corner of the room, just behind her. A sentinel. A threat made visible only to her. Her mother couldn't see him, but the message was as clear as a gunshot. "We know where she lives. We can get to her. Your cooperation is not just for your own sake." "I have to go, Mom," Alara said, her voice strained. "I love you. I love you too, sweetie. Call me soon." The screen went dark. Thorne steepled his fingers, a look of serene satisfaction on his face. "A lovely woman, your mother. It's important to keep families safe, don't you agree? I trust you'll remember that as you continue to cooperate with us." He thought he had just broken her. He thought he had found her weak point and crushed it under his thumb. He was wrong. In his hubris, he had made a fatal error. He had taken this from a fight for her own survival and made it a fight for her mother's life. He had given her more than a reason to run. He had given her a reason to win. As she walked back to her room, the key card and the memory chip feeling like a live coal in her pocket, the last vestiges of fear were burned away by a cold, righteous fury. 0200. The clock was ticking. The hours after Thorne's psychological assault crept by with agonizing slowness. In her sterile room, Alara was a coiled spring of potential energy. Fear was a distant hum beneath the roar of purpose. She sat on her bed, feigning sleep, but her mind was racing, replaying Dr. Benedict's instructions, visualizing the schematics she had glimpsed on the micro SD card using a hidden reader function on the burner phone. Corridor B, 4th floor. Janitorial hub, ventilation shaft, 0200. Every detail was a prayer. She marked the time by the faint, rhythmic footsteps of the guard, Peterson, in the hall. His lazy patrol was now the ticking clock of her liberation. She had the key card and the memory chip tucked into the waistband of her sweatpants, their hard edges a constant, reassuring pressure against her skin. At precisely 0157, she slid off the bed, her bare feet silent on the composite floor. She stood by the door, her ear pressed against the cool metal, listening. Thump. 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 Her own heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. At 0200, it began. A faint, distant alarm started to blare from the far side of the facility. Not a piercing fire alarm, but a series of urgent, coded beeps, a medical alert. She heard muffled shouts down the hall, then the sound of running footsteps, heavy boots moving away from her position. Dr. Benedict had kept his word. The diversion was in play. This was her window. Her hands trembled as she retrieved the key card. She slid it into the slot by the door. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, instead of the rejecting red light she had dreaded, a soft green light blinked on, followed by the quiet thunk of the magnetic lock disengaging. The sound was the sweetest music she had ever heard. She eased the door open, peering into the empty, shadow-draped corridor. The usual omnipresent white light had been replaced by a dimmer, emergency-level glow. She slipped out, her heart in her throat. She had to get to the stairwell before Peterson completed his rounds at the other end of the building and returned. Every step was a gamble. She hugged the wall, moving with a speed and silence she didn't know she possessed. She passed silent, locked doors like her own, each one a potential prison. She reached the stairwell, its heavy fire door, a welcome sight. Inside, the air was stale and smelled of dust. She didn't dare take the elevator. She flew up the concrete steps, taking them two at a time, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The 4th floor was eerily quiet. It was clearly an administrative level, darker and less patrolled than her own. Following the schematics in her memory, she found Corridor B, and at its end a simple door marked Maintenance J4. The keycard worked again. The room was a cramped, dusty space filled with cleaning supplies and defunct machinery. It smelled of bleach and old oil. Against the far wall, behind a stack of rusted shelving, was the locker Dr. Benedict had described. Inside, tucked beneath a pile of rags, was the burner phone. It was an old, simple flip phone, but right now, it was the most beautiful object in the world. Next to it was the ventilation shaft, a large metal grate screwed into the wall. The screws were old and tight. For a frantic minute, her fingers couldn't get a purchase. Panic began to bubble in her chest. Using the edge of the keycard as a makeshift screwdriver, she worked on one screw, then another, her knuckles scraping against the grate. It finally came loose with a groan of protesting metal. The shaft was a black, claustrophobic maw. Without a second's hesitation, she squeezed inside, pulling the heavy grate back into place behind her. The darkness was absolute. The air was thick with dust that made her want to sneeze, a sound that could give her away. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, the cold metal pressing into her skin, the memory chip a hard lump against her stomach. It was a terrifying, desperate crawl, a blind journey through the guts of the machine that had imprisoned her. After what felt like an eternity, she felt a change in the air. A draft, cool, fresh. She scrambled towards it and saw it, a faint rectangle of less darkness ahead, the exit grate. Pushing against it, she was met with resistance, then a rusty squeal as it swung open. She tumbled out, not onto the ground, but onto the graveled surface of the facility's roof. She was out. For a moment, she just breathed, gulping down the cool, damp night air, the smell of freedom. Above her, a canopy of stars was visible, a sight so beautiful and vast it brought tears to her eyes. But she wasn't safe. The facility sprawled below, a dark, windowless monolith in the middle of a deserted landscape. In the distance, she could see the faint glow of a highway. She pulled out the burner phone. Her fingers, slick with sweat and grime, fumbled with the buttons. She had one number, given to her by Benedict. David Chen, an investigative journalist known for his takedowns of corrupt defense contractors. A man who feared no one. She prayed he would answer. He did. On the second ring, his voice groggy but sharp. "Chen, my name is Alara Vance," she said, her voice a ragged whisper. "I'm a captive inside a secret military medical facility. I have proof of an illegal human experiment called Project Nightingale, including suppressed data showing its fatal flaws and a cover-up orchestrated by General Marcus Thorne." There was a pause on the other end. "That's a hell of an accusation. How do I know this isn't a prank?" "Because I'm sending you the proof right now," she said, her fingers flying as she navigated the phone's simple menu. "A data package. It has my recorded testimony, internal project files, everything. It's triple encrypted. If you don't receive a second-stage decryption key from me by 0400 hours in exactly 73 minutes, the package will automatically decrypt and forward itself to the AP, Reuters, the New York Times, and a dozen other outlets. Consider them a dead man's switch. You're my only phone call, Mr. Chen. I need you to get me out." She could hear him typing furiously. "Okay, Vance. I have the file. It's the real deal. Where are you?" She described her location, the highway in the distance. They agreed on a rendezvous, a 24-hour gas station about 2 miles from the base's main gate. Getting off the roof was a challenge, but she found a maintenance ladder. Getting off the base was even harder. She crept through the shadows, skirting the perimeter fence until she found what the schematics had shown her. A large drainage culvert that ran under the fence and out towards the main road. Without hesitation, she plunged into the darkness, half crawling, half wading through muddy water, until she emerged, soaked and shivering, on the other side. She was on a public road, free. The gas station's fluorescent lights were a beacon in the darkness. It was just a few hundred yards away. She was so close she could taste it. She broke into a run, her legs pumping, her lungs burning. Suddenly, headlights sliced through the darkness, pinning her in their glare. A black SUV, the same model that had taken her, screeched to a halt, blocking her path. The doors flew open. General Thorne stepped out, his face a mask of cold fury, his perfect uniform now slightly disheveled. The calm, condescending father figure was gone, replaced by a predator. 2 MPs flanked him, their weapons drawn but not aimed. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Alara?" Thorne's voice was a low growl. Did you think you could just walk away from your duty? Alara stopped, her chest heaving. She was cornered, but the fear was gone, replaced by the cold, hard clarity she'd found in her room. She stood her ground. It's already over, General. He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. It's over when I say it's over. You are coming back with me. The asset will be secured. I'm not an asset, and I'm not coming back, she said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. And you're not going to do anything to me. Because in about 10 minutes, David Chen is going to publish a story that will end your career. He's going to tell the world about Project Nightingale. He's going to tell them about the cover-up, and he's going to tell them about the fatal flaw you knowingly ignored. He's going to tell every soldier that you see their lives as acceptable losses. Thorne's face went rigid. You're bluffing, you're a hysterical girl. No one will believe a word you say. As he spoke, another set of headlights appeared, this one topped with flashing blue and red lights. A local police cruiser, moving at a cautious speed, pulled up behind the SUV. It was likely Thorne's own men who'd called it in, a trespasser on government property report to contain her. An overweight, weary-looking sergeant stepped out, his hand resting on his service weapon. Folks, what's going on here? The sergeant asked, his eyes taking in the scene. The blacked-out SUV, the armed soldiers, the general in full uniform, and a young woman in dirty sweats, who looked both terrified and defiant. This is a military matter, Sergeant, Thorne snapped, his authority absolute in his own mind. Stand down and leave this to us. The sergeant frowned, his gaze settling on Alara. He was a cop, not a soldier, and he didn't like being ordered around on his own patch. Sir, with all due respect, you're on a county road, and this young lady looks like she's in distress. I need to ask her if she's okay. I am not okay, Alara said, her voice clear and strong. This man is trying to abduct me. That is a classified national security matter, Thorne roared, his composure finally shattering. The sergeant was now fully suspicious. He put his hand up. Everybody just stay put. Thorne was trapped. His absolute power on the base meant nothing here, on this strip of asphalt, under the authority of a small-town cop. The clock on the gas station sign flipped from 3:59 to 4. Alara looked at Thorne, a cold, triumphant smile spreading across her face. Time's up, General, she said softly. Check the news.